Hello, my name is JARRI LANGE, and welcome to the show today. We're going to be talking about food, food in a way perhaps you've never really heard it discussed, politically, emotionally, what it really means to us to have food or not to have food. And we have with us our distinguished guest today, Mr. Larry Sly, who's Executive Director of the Food Bank of Solano County and Contra Costa County. And along with my son, Michael, who has also had skirmishes in this field in helping people get food and clothing and other things that he's been able to do. Thank you both for being with us today.
Pleasure.
We're going to be talking about the welfare of the people and what happens when people do not have food. What are the ramifications here around our cities and our communities? And I think it's far more serious and widespread than many of us have thought. So perhaps we'll enlighten the community today. Certainly with you, Larry, you're on the front lines. So tell us how you got started in the food bank, how many years you've been there, and why you chose it as a profession.
Well, I think it chose me, Jerry. I don't think I chose it. I was hired 38 years ago to work for the Food Bank of Contra Costa and Solano. And at that point, it was a small two-person operation. I was actually the truck driver to begin with.
Okay.
And the idea was that there were 17 emergency food pantries that gave people a free 3-day food supply. Folks would go to the social service office to apply for food stamps or some other government assistance, find that they'd forgotten their children's birth certificates or some other documentation they needed. So they'd send them to a pantry that was generally in a church somewhere, and they would have that food to keep them through that emergency situation. So fast forward 38 years later, we now find ourselves distributing over 20 million pounds of food a year, and that food is there as a supplement for people on an ongoing basis. People need help every month. So we're not doing the emergency, we're now part of the support system for low-income people in our community.
Yeah, how were you able to, from 38 years ago, what was your status then, and what kinds of skill sets did you have to acquire to become an executive?
We learned on the fly, Michael. It was something where, again, I was the truck driver. We had this base of nonprofits that were providing food, and our job was how do we serve them? So in a way, it's still the same piece today. What's our customer base? Who needs the help we provide? How do we do that in the best way possible? Been a big change for us in that the nature of the food we get has changed too. In the early days, it was all canned goods primarily. Now it's mainly fresh produce. So we've changed the world significantly.
How about the numerical targets in the county, say of Contra Costa and Solano? Are we talking, was it 2 million people in those two counties or something?
1.6 million, pretty close, yeah. And it's pretty much 2/3 Contra Costa, 1/3 Solano. We work effectively as we can in every city. We actually just recently had a conversation with nonprofit agencies in the city of Vallejo, trying to see how can we improve the service we're providing in that community, hopefully use that as a model for ways we might help other cities in Solano and Contra Costa County both.
Good, excellent.
Yeah, we've had to stretch, and it's the way it works.
Well, tell us how things have changed in the past couple of years. And I remember, I was on the board with you,
exactly.
and it was just the most wonderful experience of my life to learn how important it was, giving food out to people and how needy people are, And I was surprised, and I thought, I grew up in the time when things were pretty shaky back in the 1920s and 30s and 40s, and I know how my father and mother had to scramble for food. We didn't have food banks then.
Nope.
And we had no way to really get food to people on a regular basis. So we have improved, but now things are so difficult with the drought and with all the other things. How are you handling the changes today?
Well, it's been really interesting, Jerry, because we have a state association called the California Association of Food Banks, and they've done an excellent job at building relationships with the agricultural industry. So oranges that are not up to market standard, that are too large or small or got an abrasion on the skin, they're getting those donated to us, and that's been a real big resource that has grown dramatically. So our food bank has built a lot of distribution programs around that. We have a beverage truck that goes to 58 sites in Contra Costa and Solano counties, and we give away 20 to 30 pounds of fresh produce to people in the community. We have programs that take it to low-income schools and give it to the students there. We have programs that distribute food to senior citizens, and they're getting fresh produce. So the distribution program has really changed dramatically. The challenge, as you mentioned, is the drought. From what we understand from our state association, the food will still be there, but it's going to be a whole lot more expensive. So we've got to pay for the costs, and we have to pay for fuel. None of those costs are going down, so we know that we're going to have to raise a lot more money in the community to make that continue.
Well, now, what are some of the ways that you can raise that money?
Well, we get about half the money that we get from the community comes from individuals. So we ask people through direct mail appeals and through conversations we have with folks to give us the money that we need. We have a budget of about $10 million a year, so more than $5 million of that comes from individuals. But we also rely on faith communities, we rely on service clubs, and we also rely on the corporate community to donate.
I was going to ask you,
generously.
isn't this time to let the corporate community know how it can affect their businesses?
And many of them get it. We get great support from the refineries in Contra Costa County. We get support from Safeway. We get support from Whole Foods. We get support from a lot of companies who understand that people being well fed is good for their business.
That's right.
I imagine you probably have testimonials from all levels, from the corporate level to the community level, but I'd like to know what kind of reception you receive from the people that are receiving it as their testimonials.
Believe me, it's heartrending. It really is, because you can tell you made a difference in those people's lives. We get stories where the program that we have called Farm to Kids, that takes the food to the after-school programs, we've had kids sort of put on the big bluster of, I'm not going to eat this, I don't like this, and I'm going to, carrot, and, I've never really seen, broccoli. I'm not going to eat this thing that looks like a tree. And then they come back to us the next day, and the story is that that's what they had for dinner, was what we gave them the night before. So you know that you made a really profound effect in their lives, because there's parents who are just trying to get by and trying to figure out, what am I going to get my kid for dinner tonight? I've got nothing but maybe peanut butter and bread, and that's it.
Can you give us a kind of a profile of the type of people that are requesting food? I mean, nationalities, ages, ethnicities?
It's everybody over the map. I mean, I'll tell you what, it's been interesting, because the frightening thing for me has been that it's not the people we think of. It's not the alcoholic individuals sleeping in the doorway. We do a survey with our national organization, Feeding America, the people coming to the agencies we serve. And with that, we find out that nearly half the people who come to us have a working individual in the family. So these are folks who've got somebody who's employed, but they're making $10 an hour, so they're bringing home $20,000 a year. That's not enough to live in this community. You can't afford rent, you can't afford to feed your kids. So we're dealing with those kinds of issues where it is, every ethnic group, every strata in society needs food.
Well, this concept of starvation or the lack of access to food, I'm thinking that a place like the United Nations or some place on the international level should declare that every human being has a right to a meal, to a square meal. Is there any kind of discussions like that
I don't know
happening?
if the government has done it, but within the food bank world, that's something we all accept. Our kind of tagline is, because no one should go hungry.
Right.
I mean, we're in a society that has so much food, so many resources. There's absolutely no reason a person should be hungry. The problem is not amount, the problem is distribution. It's getting it to the people who need it.
So if there is an overage, for example, of food, and it gets tossed away because of laws and other kinds of things, so it's actually misdirected, that it could save a community.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, I think that's really a crime in our society. We shouldn't be wasting the resource. And frankly, you look at things like the CalFresh program, the food stamp program, that's something where we ought to be doing that. We ought to be ensuring that people have healthy food. It makes me crazy sometimes, because nobody ever disagrees that the school lunch program is a good thing to do, right? I mean, feeding kids is the thing we all agree should happen. And yet somehow, if you give people food to take home to their families to eat, or give them food stamps, that somehow becomes a big political question. And I think that's a real strange thing about the way we look at the assistance we ought to be providing.
Well, it's the same way that they look at the child in the house, steps outside of the house, becomes a citizen, goes to the school and becomes a student.
Right.
Those are three different titles: child, citizen, student, all politics.
Yep.
From here to there, and why they can't, and why they. How has this impacted, or what are we hearing about the international side? I mean, if if food banks are not in other parts of the world, I mean, what kind of information can you share on that?
Well, interestingly, food banks are growing in other parts of the world.
Oh, good.
There's a thing called the Global Food Bank Network, and they're doing the same thing, taking the principle that we have and applying it in other countries. Actually, quite a while ago, it's probably been 10 years, I took a trip to Bulgaria because they were trying to set up food banks, and this was in a post-Soviet era. You know, it was a country that had a lot of issues to deal with, but they were, you know, now independent, not into the Soviet sphere as much. But it was interesting because one of the meetings we had was with people from Nabisco. And Nabisco were saying, yeah, I mean, we're selling stuff in these stores and we do have overages. So how do we develop systems that will allow that food to get out to low-income people in these communities? So it's the same principle wherever there are people in need, there are food resources. How do you make the connection to make it work?
Well, I was thinking what you really need now is more money.
Absolutely.
More money from the corporate world. And perhaps I was thinking you might start doing, there's a lot of great small theaters growing up around the community, in all the communities. And of course, I think they would love to do something for the food bank. And I was thinking, planning on doing any fundraisers with some of the entertainment. There are a lot of young bands around that would come and instigating certain kinds of things that you can start bringing money in and have it, just even if you had a special bank account that you need for just an emergency.
Exactly. Well, that's what we're trying to do, is to increase the food resources that come to us. And I know you've introduced me to someone who does shows that we might connect with in the future.
Right.
Yeah, and I think that's part of it. And I tell you, Jerry, in some ways, the great thing about that is it brings community together.
Yes, it does.
Because a lot of what we do may not produce $1 million, but if it produces connections with people and they all then feel like they're doing something, and it raises the visibility of the issue. Because a lot of this comes down to political decisions that are being made in our community.
Absolutely.
And if political leaders understand that we as a society will not tolerate hunger, something will be done to make that happen.
Yeah.
So short term, yes, we need to raise money, we need to raise food, we need to get that food out to people. But if in the larger role, we can also be building a constituency that says hunger is not to be tolerated.
No, it is not.
I think that's something that's very important for us to get out
Well, I
there.
think another thing that people haven't had a picture of, because we've pretty much taken control of distributing food.
Completely.
They don't understand, I don't think, what happens when you don't do that. And I think we need to let people know we've reached a place now where they have to give a little more. And we have to raise a little more money. And the thought being, I don't think people have seen things like the incidents I talked about in Argentina, where they had this very high class element that always had food, and suddenly there was no food, and they were the first to disappear. They just disappeared from the city, and I think they were, scared. They didn't want anybody to know they didn't have any food, couldn't eat, and they just were hidden. And one day, a meat truck loaded with big beef steaks broke down in the middle of the city, and the word got out, and then you saw these people come.
Right.
They fought over that food with people they had known all of their lives, scrambling like hungry animals for food. And what I'm saying is, I don't think America has come to the point where they have seen what happens to people, to your communities, that threatens your business if you have it. There's chaos in the street.
I was saying, that's the human condition.
That's
so
right.
It could cross borders. It
Yes,
should
completely.
cross.
Absolutely.
So let me ask you a question. And have there been any discussions as to what happens when the food element is missing? I mean, what's the first thing that happens?
No, it's completely frightening. I mean, we understand that that's the role we have to play.
Okay.
And I'll tell you, I think the frightening thing for us, Michael, is that the more we do, it scares us that the need hasn't changed. I mean, we're not solving it. It's not going away. We do distributions, mobile distributions, where we give away surplus food we get from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, as well as produce and bread and dairy items and things like that. And we get 500 to 600 people showing up. So it's almost like the bread lines you talked about in the Depression era to pick up those bags. And these are people who, again, may have a working individual in their family, but in order to stretch their resources to where they know they can feed their children, they're coming down to get the bags of food, and it's it's an essential part of their lives. So, it's something that we know we can't let happen. People have to be fed. That's the basic piece of life.
Are there people out there that don't even know that they qualify?
Oh yeah. Yeah, completely so. I mean, we do a lot to try and get the message out. So we get, electronically and posting notices, and the communication is really good among, people. Tell their neighbors and their friends, and word of mouth is one of your best tools for getting the
And I
word
think
out
that
there.
word of mouth is also part of the solution, that each one can reach one.
Yep.
I may not think that whatever I add to the pot is going to help, but it does, doesn't it?
It does. It really makes a difference. And again, we have donors who give us thousands of dollars each month, and we have donors who give us $25 a year. We need them all.
That's right.
Because it adds up to what the support is that will make our work possible. Again, we have charges for every piece of food, so that $25 is going to allow us to probably buy 100 pounds of food. So that people make a difference in whatever way they can. And it's really helpful for us because we have a lot of donors. So I feel like we are building a community of those who understand what we're doing and know they can make a difference in the lives of people in need.
Well, I was thinking of two things that crossed my mind. If you're doing things in the entertainment world, whether it's with musicians, which I know have always come to the
Right.
assistance of their particular community, is that you will raise awareness of the audience that's in there.
Yep. Sure.
And they will know, and you don't know who's going to be sitting in that audience because they're coming to be entertained,
Right.
but it gives you a chance to come out in the beginning and tell what the problem is, how dire it is, and that anyone in the community that would like to sign up, and you have the places for them
Yep.
to sign up when they go out.
Absolutely.
First of all, you get a lot of help that you didn't know, and they didn't know they were needed.
Right.
But the second thing is to the awareness of the corporate community and other communities that would help if they knew how bad things were. And what comes to mind is a white paper. I think if all the food bank executive directors could each do a white paper on their particular community, and then maybe over the overview of everyone, and get that paper out to what happens without food.
Yep.
We have to create a scenario where there is no food
Right.
if we want to get people, because it's horrendous.
Oh, it's terrible. And I think you're right. A big part of what we do is education. I think that's a critical piece to making
Absolutely.
work possible. And a lot of it comes down to, we rely on volunteers incredibly for
right.
the work we do. We probably have nearly 80,000 hours of volunteer time given to us. And not only does that give us work that's being done, but it also gives us an educational opportunity. Gets people into the warehouse to understand. When you go into a food bank warehouse, it's like Costco. I mean, we've got the racks and the pallet jacks and
Yeah,
the
that's
forklifts,
right, that's
and
right.
we're a major food distribution business. And people can understand then that their time makes a difference, and their financial support and their food donations, and by the community coming together and making those connections come in place. That's how the difference occurs.
That's right, because I know a lot of times I worked with the churches. I went to, when I
Exactly.
distributed, the churches opened up.
Yeah.
So you've got all kind of things that open up that in a sense can be a blessing in the future because
Completely.
you wouldn't have done it.
Right.
And also to get all these different groups out in the community that are doing things that would love to do fundraising.
Right. Well, and like you said, the entertainers are amazing.
Yeah.
Bruce Springsteen is like totally wedded to food
love
banks.
this guy.
And he did a concert at the Concord Pavilion for us several years ago. Again, talked to people about food banks, allowed us to pass the bucket around at the
I love
end.
it, yeah.
He actually gave us free tickets, and we were able to auction those off for thousands of dollars. But again, it's people raising the visibility.
But that's how he helps.
That's how he helps.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And it doesn't
Yeah.
really put a lot of strain on him.
No.
He just gives you the
Comes
venue.
out and does what he does.
And in a way, even the money we get is almost secondary as to the visibility he raises. You know, talking to hundreds and thousands of people who are sitting there listening to him and raising the issue and telling him, you can do something. You know?
You can.
So how do you interface with Congress or the politicians and the powers that be?
So part of what we do is to help educate Congress as well. And we want them to understand on the ground level, like you said, Jerry, where our life takes place.
Yes.
This is what we're seeing. And so we're talking to our congressional representatives, to our senators, to our state representatives, because they need to understand that what's going on in their communities is something that they've got to deal with. And you know, when they're making decisions on where budget choices are being made, food needs to be a primary piece to make that go on. So the farm bill that passes every 5 years or so is a big part of what enables us to get money to run the food stamp program, the CalFresh program. It also includes subsidies for grain crops and all kinds of other things that the government funds. So we need to make sure that they understand that the part they're doing that helps to feed hungry people is as important as subsidies to the,
It
sugar
seems
beet.
like the farmers are a political football. I mean, they're defunding them. They're
Right.
And not only that, but then you have nature.
Droughts and stuff
The
happen.
droughts is
exactly.
happening, the heavy rains,
Right.
the tornadoes,
Yep,
all of that.
exactly.
So it's a fabric, it's a social fabric that, you have somebody that gives you $25 and somebody that gives you $10,000.
Right.
But the food bank receives both of those equally, is
Exactly.
what I'm hearing.
Yep.
So you're apolitical that way.
Correct.
Wow, that's a beautiful story.
But I think you're right that when you look at it, it is the community. It's what the community does, and that translates into what elected officials do, because they're our representatives, and we should be telling them we want to see hungry people fed. I mean, bottom line, as a society, well-fed kids do better in school. They get better grades. They're going to grow up and be better employees. I look at it as a long-term investment we're making as a society to see
Now
to it
this
people
is,
are fed.
yeah, I guess a good question that I want to ask is about the spirituality of all of this. I noticed that Glide Memorial and some churches
Feed their people.
feed their people. How do you interface not only with, let's say, the religious or faith-based community,
Right.
but are you a Christian-based organization, or is it just non-denominational and you help everybody?
Yeah, we're non-denominational. We're a tax-exempt 501c3 organization, but we interface very much with the faith community because our mission and their mission is the same, feeding people. It's really great. We have a group of faith communities in the Lafayette area in Contra Costa who have come together, and it's very good because it's very ecumenical. It's Jewish temples, Presbyterian Church, and even the San Ramon Islamic Center have come together to look at the issue of hunger and what can they do about it, and also a lot of the other social issues that exist as well. Hunger and food are one piece of a larger matrix of problems a lot of people have.
One big issue would be is the people watching this show. They say, "Well, how can I help? How can I help? How can they?"
Obviously, financial donations, if that's easy for them, is something we want them to do. Food drives. We are doing food drives throughout the year. We have a food drive we do with the National Association of Letter Carriers May 10th. We do food drives during the holiday season. We're collecting food from individuals willing to give year-round. Giving food makes a difference. Or volunteer time. People coming down to help. And we plug people in whatever way they can help. So we actually have within our food bank what we call an ambassadors group. People who will talk about the kinds of speeches we give to organizations, get them trained well enough to go out and represent us to other organizations. Because I think that's a big part for me is people need to understand what they can do to make a difference. And the more that word gets spread, it's great with television shows like this, a great way to reach a larger audience, but I'm fine with going to talk to a service club that's got 20 people in it because they need to hear the message as well.
Well, I'm thinking that the next place that you should go is where the money is. And the money is where those young social media people are.
Absolutely.
Jumping up here to San Francisco, all of our area, they're moving everybody out and coming in. Well, that's fine. But come in, would you care to give some money
Help,
to them?
exactly.
I would think you would definitely target them. First of all, they're different. They're not a greedy group. They are not. They're young and they want to give, and you would go make a pitch to them would be far different from doing to some of the older corporations that have been giving you a long time. But they come from a different place. I have the feeling. What about having contacted them?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's one of the things we see, and we're actually working a lot more on social media as one of the things. We're Facebook and
That's
all
right.
of those other
Because
things.
you're not going to miss that money.
But it's something too where I think you see a generational change as well. At least our experience has been that the millennial generation really, it's critical to them that the place they work have a social mission as well. They're not there to generate money. The paycheck is part of the reason why we're there, but it's not the compelling reason why they're there. And so I think for them, it really is a matter of they want to know that their company is making a difference. And for them, that's critical. So, I mean, I think we see a lot of the studies that have been done that a person will leave a company if all they're looking at is the bottom line.
That's right.
If they want to know that there's a social reason why the company
I think
exists as well.
these young people have a conscience.
Completely.
And I think we ought to appeal to that conscience, that if you have the amount of money you're getting, which you deserve because you became a part of something that you built, but how much are you willing to give to feed those people who do not have jobs, are not looking forward to getting a job because the whole game has changed.
Yeah.
And what would they be willing to give? And I believe they would do it, and I think it shouldn't be on a one-time basis.
Oh, no.
If we could arrange for them to give a certain amount once a month to this little bank that you're talking about, I think that would go a long way.
Well, and you know, the role model is there. You look at what the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is about, you know, Facebook sets aside, you know, money. I mean, all these people understand there needs to be a social mission involved as well. Because they're taking from a society that, you know, needs to be strong in order for them to prosper.
And when I think if we give for instance, you bring the little pamphlets and things, the white paper in there, the photographs and everything else, and then the history of what happens if people do not get food.
Right.
They don't want anything to upset this apple cart that they've got going. It's a beautiful thing. I love to see people make money, and they make it honestly. They don't cheat. They don't steal. They've done it by brain power, and I just think the world of what they're doing. And besides making the world a better place to live in, they're giving us all these gadgets. However, I also think they are very much like Bill Gates, conscious and aware that you have to have a stable community in order to work.
Right.
They would be the last ones that want to see street fights out in the streets. And so I would really appeal to them, not on a one-time basis, but that how much per month would they be able to give to the areas of all of the food banks, the central place that you could draw from, and let them share some of the gifts that have been given to them. And they're very wealthy at this point.
I think there's a spiritual something that you get by giving.
Yeah, that's right. And they see what Bill Gates has done.
You give with one hand and you receive with two.
Yeah.
So, but I don't think they know that.
No, they don't. But I think they're young enough to agree with it.
Absolutely.
Because they have been given much.
Right.
And they can't spend that money in a lifetime.
And they certainly can't take it with them.
They're not going to take it with them, that's guaranteed. Well, and I think they realize too, because they can see the positive things that come. You know, I mean, if you're able to help deal with polio or help stop malaria or do the kinds of things that the Gates Foundation is doing internationally.
That's right.
It's just, it's absolutely the right thing to do. And we see that with a lot of the software companies. They want, and it's better for them to have employees who are satisfied, who feel good about what they do. And so I think they realize that they're really helping to make a difference because of the way that they're, you know, generating food to feed hungry people. It's exactly the right thing.
Well, I think the first target, if you want to get that white paper out and the DVDs and everything else that you've got, I think the first target that would be them. Would be them. You know why? They would shame by the time you get to the corporate world and said, this is what these young men did.
Yeah.
They're multimillionaires.
Or young women.
And women, right?
Well, then they're setting the model. I mean, I think that's
I
going
think
to
they
be
would
something.
set the model for the corporate
So
world.
there's a consciousness about this thing.
Exactly.
It's just getting ready to get started.
We're right on the edge of all these wonderful solutions that we're talking about. It's over already. We'd have to have you come back.
Okay.
But I think the next step we do, Larry, is that you would bring several of your co-executive directors
would love
here,
to see that.
and we'll finish off this show and tell them what we've said, show them the DVD, and where do they want to discuss from there. And I think we'll build on this.
Sounds great.
So thank you so much for joining us. My name is JARRI Lange, and for my two guests, Larry Sly, Michael Lange, we bid you adieu.
I do. Food for thought.